Well, hi there. Thank you for tuning in to one of our videos. You'll see that we have a whole bunch of them, and we invite you to go to the menu here on the BDR under News and the Lunch Gathering, and you'll find a whole list of different topics that our videos have covered over the past 2 years. Also, the best way to know when the new videos are being posted is to be subscribed. And there's a little subscribe button here in the lower right-hand corner of the picture, and we invite you to click on that and become part of our family. Thanks. Enjoy the video. As always, we're happy to remind everyone briefly that Kintronic Labs and Nortel are providing us with assistance in bringing this to you and helping us to benefit from all this material. Today's theme is the firewall. And, well, you know, some people think of the firewall in terms of a brick wall, that supposedly this is going to protect you from whoever is out there and provide good grief security. But then we find out that a lot of the brick walls have holes in them. And that's what we're going to discuss. Why we want to know what a firewall is, and we want to know how that firewall can help us. So we've got Tim Pozar, we've got Shane Toven, Danny Boyer says he may stop by, but we'll get started with Tim and see if we cannot get this topic off the starting block. Tim?
Oh, thank you. And by the way, the pictures you just saw, those are great. And I'm not going to be doing any slides. So that's all the graphics you're going to get from me or this session. There's a question about, Barry asked about what a firewall is. And then there's some misconceptions about what network address translation or NAT does, and if that's a firewall. And so we had a nice talk a couple days ago about this, and with my argument that NAT is not a firewall, even though people may make those assumptions when they go out and buy a router and say, well, I'm going to just put everything behind NAT and I'm going to be secure. That may or may not be true, and that's not necessarily the purpose of NAT. The original purpose of NAT was to try to not exhaust the IPv4 space, or try to be able to use address space that you are not going to necessarily publish on the internet. It was a way for, at one point in time, it was relatively easy to get IPv4 space. They were handing it out like water, and but try to do that now. You're not going to be able to do that from your local provider. You're not going to get a /16 or a /8 or a /24 or whatever from your local provider. That address space, actually, if you look at the pricing on address space right now, it's around $60 per IP address or so. It's probably more than that. That was when I last checked about 6 months ago. But all that's going to do is be going up because it's a rare commodity. So early on in like around 89 or so, people understood that they wanted to be able to use address space that was not publicly routed. There's a guy by Van Jacobson who sort of came up with this idea of sort of mapping, not necessarily NAT per se, because that didn't really get codified into about 1991 and 1992. You can look at these, the IETF RFCs 1287 and 1335 to look at these. It finally was sort of formalized in 1994 in RFC 1497 with this thing called address allocations for private internets. That was formalized. That was more formalized and updated in what's better known as RFC 1918. So when people talk about this private address space, sometimes they'll use the term RFC 1918 or 1918 address space. And that's the address space that you typically know when you deploy a router, which would be something like 192.168.1 dot something or whatever. There's other address space like 172.16, and then there's other address space that's in that same document, which is 10 .0.0.0. So those are addresses that are never going to be announced on the public internet. Those are addresses that you can use behind NAT. So there's also another address space out there, which is 100.64, which is what /10, which is what ISPs will use, because they can't hand out public IP addresses to every single, or many of them can't, to every single customer. So they hand out this 10.64/10 address space to be able to get people online, and it's called carrier grade NAT, or CG-NAT, and it was defined in RFC 6598. Provides quite a bit of address space. So it's probably, was it around, it's like 4 million addresses, a /10 would be. So that gets, but you can reuse that in places. So if you have like an ISP that's in a particular town, you could probably give away 4 million IP addresses there, but you'll probably have to reuse that 1064 someplace else. So that's one way that they've been able to extend the life of IPv4 because of the address space exhaustion. NAT works like this. NAT will basically prevent any traffic from coming into your network. And that's where the misconception of, is it a firewall? And we can talk about what a firewall is in a bit. And then what happens is anytime that you have a client on your office or home network want to connect to, say, Google, they're going to create a connection, or they're going to start a connection that's going to go through this NAT device and go out to the public internet. And the NAT device will say, oh, I have something coming from 192.168.1.10, and I need to have it look like it's coming out of the IP address that I got assigned from the ISP, and that's going to go out, and that's what's going to connect to the Google website, and then the traffic going back and forth between Google and the client is going to be translated back and forth by the NAT device, and there's going to be a little entry in a NAT session table to say, oh, okay, when I see packets coming back from Google for this port, I'm going to send it to this client on my inside or my LAN side of the space. There's 65,000 ports that you can use per IP address for NAT. So normally people don't run out on this stuff, and this works just fine. Where you run into some problems if you're trying to do NAT, say in a large, well, I do public Wi-Fi for cities and things like that. So we tend to have to use multiple IP addresses because we'll have more than 65,000 sessions of people trying to connect to the outside world. And you'll particularly have this problem when people are cruising websites with a lot of content, because every time you make, or many times when you do a web connection, those are individual sessions for each object that you're downloading, such as an image or a multimedia or a page or something else like that, unless you're using some other newer protocols that get around that problem. But that's NAT. So that's it, again, and the first thing what happens is when people deploy these sort of things, they go, you know what, I need to get my barracks box available to the outside world or whatever. I need to be able to access my my desktop, or I need to access the transmitter, the Burke box or something. So they start poking holes in that, and that's the point where it definitely stops becoming a firewall. Any sort of holes that you create in there or port forwarding that you may be doing is going to thank you, Barry, is going to basically make it available to anybody on the internet, unless you do certain things to be able to push to have the outside world be able to go out and exploit your barracks box or your Burke or whatever. So what is a firewall? Let's get into that a little bit. A firewall, Cisco defined it. I saw this on a website. I thought it was a pretty good description. Firewall is a network security device that monitors incoming and outgoing network traffic and decides whether to allow or block specific traffic based on a defined set of security rules. Firewalls have been a first line of defense in network security for 25 years. They establish a barrier between secured and controlled internal networks that can be trusted and untrusted outside networks such as the internet. Firewall can be hardware, it can be software, it can be software as a service or SaaS. It could be a public cloud or a private cloud or a number of other ways. Now, what firewall usually means is, and when I said it's going to be blocking specific traffic or allowing specific traffic based on defined set of security rules. So that means that you're going to have a rule that says, in port forwarding, that's kind of a rule that you're basically saying all traffic from the internet can go to this particular port on the firewall or the NAT box and go to this barracks box. But that's kind of that's creating a large hole for any sort of truck to drive through. So you really want to have better knobs on this to be able to make sure that you have better security. So you're going to add some other rules in there to say something like, for instance, if you're running like a tie line box and you're always getting a feed from a particular source, you may want to limit the traffic to that source, to a known IP address. So that's going to ensure that the rest of the world is not necessarily going to be able to get behind that NAT box and be able to get into that barracks box or the tie line or Comrex or whatever you're going to be doing. So that's kind of one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is looking at sort of dynamic rules. Dynamic rules may be something like if the bandwidth is too excessive, then you're going to clamp down. Or if the bandwidth is coming, if traffic is coming from address space that you don't know about, then you may block, or you may have a situation where after a certain time, a number of times that somebody tries to authenticate to like your barracks box or your tie line or something else like that, it will shut down that port to those IP addresses that are trying to exploit the device that you have behind your firewall. So those are good examples of rules. And what I was going to do is actually show you, and I guess, can I share a screen, Barry? Sure. Okay. This is going to be my home router. So this is a router made by Ubiquiti, and it's basically just an edge router 12P, and it has rules that I can, firewall rules that I can add and subtract and modify. Here we go. Is that showing up?
Yep.
Okay, great. So in this, I have sort of categories of rules. These are rules that would go into the router itself. This one called WAN in. I don't know if people could see that or it's too small or what. Let me make this. Is that bigger then? Does that look better?
Yeah, it looks a little bigger.
Doesn't? Am I sharing the right screen?
You're showing us this window and another window behind it.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe that is one here. Okay.
Right.
So that this WAN in, it would be traffic that would be going in through the firewall into my local LAN. WAN local is traffic that would be going directly into the router itself. It would not necessarily be passed through to my WAN connection. So looking at WAN in, I'm going to look at the rule sets I have here. These are specific rule sets that I have for holes, basically, that I want to make sure that people can or devices can get to. So I have a file server at home. You can see it's at 192.168.100.9. I want to be able to do SNMP queries against it. So I'll open up port 161, and then that's going to be going, and I'm going to be supporting both TCP and UDP. Normally, I did something here that I said not to do, was anybody on the, because there's no source address here, this is available to anybody to be able to get into from the outside world. And so what normally I would do is I would add a group here. So this is one's called NetOps, and this is these are IP addresses of devices that I know that I have and I'm willing to pass traffic for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here into the WAN in, edit rule set again, and I'm going to limit the IP address that can get into this box by adding this source, this group, this address group at this point. So at this point in time, now you'll see here, the source is limited to those two IP addresses as part of that group. So now I know that not everybody in the public internet can be able to get to SNMP queries on my file server at home. I have the same thing on my my Cisco switch that I have here as well. So this is kind of a basic way of looking at of setting up firewalls and such. I told Barry that I had a very limited time to chat about this, and I just wanted to sort of like give a definition and then sort of like hand this over to the other folks that are probably on this call, because I actually have to disappear at 11:30 Pacific time here.
Okay, Tim, what you're showing us,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly, you called packet filtering.
Well, this is firewall rules. This is going to limit packet flows or TCP, or excuse me, IP flows from going from the outside world into my LAN. So these are rules. These are much like you would do. So I have some port forwarding rules too here. These go to a box that I have that I'm testing, and these are port forwarding rules. But again, this is, I don't have the nuance that I can put like in these firewall policies of, like, for instance, the source IP address and for instance, the type of protocols that are going to be doing, like if it's going to be a VPN protocol, or if it's going to be, there's other protocols besides TCP and UDP and such. So
what you're doing is you're taking the NAT, the NAT, and you're adding to it this basic filtering.
yeah, so NAT doesn't, NAT is not necessarily required. I could do this without NAT.
Yes, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. But if all you are doing right now is NAT, this is sort of the simplest, most basic way to start to build a firewall, although it's got some holes in it.
Yeah. Now,
question.
Sure.
Yeah, so a lot of people are trying to get to this equipment from their laptop or something like that, and their ISP is probably using DHCP, so that you can't really allow access based upon a static IP. Even the studio may have public DHCP and not a static IP.
Right. So for those what you can do is you can go out, and if you need to do an IP, static IP, and it's just not available from your ISP, you can create a tunnel that would go back to a VPN endpoint that would give you a static IP, and then you can give that out. And so this means that if your DHCP IP address, delegated IP address changes, you still have an IP address that is a static that you can use for reference.
Or you could also, in the same thing, use the MAC address as your filter point.
No, well, hold on. I don't know if that answers the other question there. The MAC address is the Ethernet address.
Yeah, and that's not transmitted across the internet either. That's just local.
Yeah.
No, that's sorry, that's right. One of the reasons that we are bringing this up, and I want to make this point before you go, is first of all, the FCC has made an NPRM to require all stations to certify every year that their cybersecurity meets standards. That's the first thing. A little more paperwork, a little more effort for the technical folks. And at the same time, we find that this is an issue that is going to require, well, more attention and probably more in the way of security than most stations have at this time.
Well, right, and there's some good starting points to look at this. I don't know if how many people here take credit cards at their radio stations, but if you are, you have to go through what's called PCI compliance, and that's a good starting point at looking at your security. Like, how are you compartmentalizing sensitive information like credit cards and such? How are you? What level of security are you running with VPNs? You know, have you stopped using SSL 1.0 and you're using, you know, TLS and things like that? So that's a great checklist to start going through it at the beginning.
Yeah, and also it's interesting that we're finding that more and more, and you mentioned this to me when we were speaking, anything that we're doing, whether it's a software firewall or it's a hardware firewall, we'll have a couple of examples of that coming up. They need to be updated on a regular basis because it is the Wild West. If you have ever stopped and looked at the log file of who is coming against your server or your site, you would be aghast. Hour after hour after hour.
One of the nice little flips, you know, check marks you can do on the rules that I have that I was showing you earlier is that, I don't know if I may not have shown it to you, is you can check mark logging. So I can look at refuses and see what is coming up against me. Now, somebody mentioned in the chat, Mark did, about even if you have a firewall, you're going to be can be subject to denial of service attacks. So that may be certainly another thing that you're going to look at in a firewall is how well does it handle that, or can you push that upstream? Can you talk to your ISPs about basically buffering denial of service attacks against you?
Greg says Moscow and Nicosia, Cyprus, are knocking on the door of one of his clients' firewall right now.
Yeah, I have a lot of attacks from China Telecom. I finally just said, screw it, and I just blocked their whole /16 or whatever it was that they had. So those are quite valid ways of basically handling these sort of things too, is starting to create access control lists or ACLs for blocks of IP addresses. One radio station I have that I've been managing or helping with is their website is they have a VM on AWS, and we just started blocking like China Telecom and a bunch of South American sites and things like that. We don't expect to be serving content to China Telecom, so it's a kind of a United States only radio station group, so blocking China is fine.
I run fail to ban on my server and got a couple thousand IP addresses blocked now.
Yeah, for the address space that we can't block, fail to ban is great. It's a way of being able to looking at your log files and seeing if you have a certain number of unauthorized or bad behavior attackers, and then what it does is it just adds a rule to your firewall table that you're typically running on your server. But you could certainly run this, you could push this out to your router as well to start blocking per IP address. And it's not so much whack-a-mole at that point. It's automatically done. You don't have to keep looking at logs and saying, okay, I need to block this address space or whatever. It just automatically happens.
Because they don't knock just once. They'll knock 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 times.
Yeah, no, you want to tolerate the maybe 3 or 4 unauthorized access, because that may be a legit person that just fat fingered their password or did something wrong. But if you see a dozen of those within like 5 minutes or something like that, then you're going to add a rule.
Or as you said, there's 65,000 ports, and there are people that will sit there with their bots and they'll try every one.
Yeah, they'll scan. Yeah, and those that's another good trigger. That's another good case for adding a rule to block them.
Very good. Tim, I know you've got to run away. We
Yeah.
hope you'll get a chance to come back to us if your other meeting ends, but we sure appreciate you guys getting us started here.
Sure.
And I'd like to toss the ball over to Shane if he's ready with something to mention. And Danny is online too, so we'll start talking in that direction.
Yeah, and thanks, Tim. Yeah, you bring up some excellent points, and you gave a great definition of the differences between firewall and NAT, what NAT is and isn't, and what a firewall is and is not. Get out of full screen mode here. That's kind of distracting me here. All right, so I think that is one of the biggest misconceptions. What's a firewall? What's a router? And the fact is, a lot of this stuff can be combined. I mean, a lot of times, even the device that your internet service provider gives you will provide, certainly at the very least, it'll provide network address translation, unless you've explicitly ordered static IP addresses from your internet provider. In which case, I hope you've got something else behind it that you're managing locally, rather than just putting your devices directly on those static IP addresses. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that I see a lot of broadcasters make, is they'll get these connections, they'll just hang devices directly off of these public internet addresses. And that is probably the worst possible case scenario that you can get at. People go, well, I'm just a small station, I'm not a big target, I'm no big deal. Well, as we just mentioned, there are bots out there that are constantly scanning the internet, looking for interesting little things to potentially attack. If it can be seen from the public internet, it can be attacked. That's why it's important to have this kind of protection on your infrastructure, even just the most basic stuff. I mean, NAT will at least prevent people from pinging your internal equipment and maybe probing your internal equipment a little bit, but it's not a firewall. It's just simply a way of basically, like you said, managing IP address allocation and conserving the public IP space. There's another thing out there called port address translation. That's where you may have one static IP address assigned to your modem, whether that be one that your ISP assigns. Maybe you use something like a dynamic DNS or something. But you're poking holes again, your brick wall. You're poking holes in that firewall and going, okay, if I come in on this public IP address on this port, that's going to go to this equipment, and so on and so on and so forth. Well, you've just basically shot any sense of protection at all out the window. So how do we get around that? Well, that's where things like virtual private networks come into play. A virtual private network is exactly what it sounds like. It creates a secure tunnel through the internet from one location or one system to another. So basically, it's establishing that connection. It's establishing it securely. So then once you're inside of there, you can access the stuff on the other side of your firewall safely and securely. So instead of typing in that public IP address and a port number or something, you would type in once you're connected, you would type in the 10 dot address for whatever. And I mean, you could do a VPN, for instance, just at your transmitter site for your equipment there. You could do a VPN for your entire studio complex. You can even interconnect site to site and make things a little bit more accessible that way. I mean, and the technology is out there. The technology is out there now to make this much, much easier than it ever used to be. I'll give you an example. There's one piece of technology that I'm really interested in, or that I've used quite a bit. It's from a company called, well, you guys are probably all familiar with Ubiquiti. They make a number of Wi-Fi and radio products, IP radio products. So let me go ahead and share my screen here really quick. We'll just go ahead and share this window here. All right, go. All right, so if you guys can see that.
Yep.
So I'll give you an example here. So here is here's one of the networks that I manage. It's the UniFi system from Ubiquiti. So you can see everything is here on this kind of at a glance platform. It shows you, okay, so here's my internet connection. I've got, I'm not oversubscribing that. Here's my firewall. That's at 53% capacity because, they don't necessarily, they have some firewalls come in all shapes and forms. And even though this is a hardware firewall, it's still passing a lot of traffic, and it doesn't have necessarily the beefiest processor in there, but it's okay. I've got 5 switches in this network, 5 access points. And right now there are 30 people on my Wi-Fi and 4 people on my guest Wi-Fi. And I can see down here the statistics for Wi-Fi and all of that fun stuff. So, all right, so that's great. So how do I go ahead and set up this, this magical VPN connection? In this platform, it actually makes it pretty straightforward. So if we go into the settings here, we go into our networks. You can see I've got a number of networks here. These are all like 10 dot addresses that I can now access from the outside world. I've got a couple that are more public that are in a different address space to kind of separate things out a little bit. So here are my firewall rules here. Go in here. Let's see if I can remember how I set this up. So WAN in, WAN out. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to shoot myself in the foot because they've moved everything around now, and I don't remember where they put the VPN settings in the new software. Oh no. Well, in any case, regardless, I can dial into this remotely, but I'm not actually connected to a VPN right now. So how am I actually getting in and monitoring all of this stuff? Well, Ubiquiti has this particular platform. UniFi has a cloud service that you can subscribe to as well, or it's free, but you can attach your devices to this cloud portal. So I'm actually getting in externally directly through their cloud portal here. And that allows me to, from anywhere, securely log in and at least look at the statistics of my network. So anyway, but yeah, I mean, the system was actually fairly straightforward to set up. I mean, it was, for the most part, it was pretty, pretty plug and play with a lot of, pretty powerful features. So that's one example of, of some hardware that's out there that's actually fairly straightforward to manage, and that offers you some fairly decent security.
What kind of price tag would that have, Shane?
It really depends on what you get. Let me take a look here really quick. So I think their core hardware right now is about $400 for their router and firewall to kind of start building one of these networks. And then the switches and the access points, of course, get added on to that. The nice thing is if you stay within that same ecosystem, it all kind of gets, you're able to manage it all from that same single interface. I mean, you can kind of mix and match within your network, and that's fine. I mean, there are other companies out there like TP-Link, for instance, makes a very similar solution. Anyway, my point here is that you definitely want to have something in place, preferably something that you can easily manage and monitor to make sure that you're not actually seeing all of these attacks. For instance, let me go back into here. One thing about firewalls is there are different types of firewalls. One type of firewall is what's called a stateful inspection firewall. So it's actually inspecting all of the packets that come through here. So for instance, I can take a look and I can see, look here at my statistics. So let's go ahead and look. I can look at my traffic statistics here, and I can see what's using my my internet connection. So since this was last reset, it's past 137 gigabytes of traffic, most of which is web traffic, a lot of social media, and then some various other protocols here too. But if you get into something like this and you see, oh, what's this unknown, 27 gigabytes of unknown, you might want to start checking into that a little bit more. But if you keep scrolling down here, it even gives you more detailed statistics about what, what's being accessed from your network and potentially what is trying to access your network. So you can get really, really granular with even a fairly modest firewall that allows you to do this stuff. This firewall also has a couple of features that are built into it called IDS and IPS. That stands for Intrusion Detection System and Intrusion Protection System. So what they do is they look for connections that could potentially be an attempt to compromise your network, either from the outside or within your network. Now, I don't have it enabled on this particular firewall since it's really not it does kind of limit the throughput on this particular firewall. And I needed the throughput more than I needed the additional layers of security in that case. But it's another feature that you can look at and kind of see what's going on here. So let's see here. I wonder if I can get at my logs here. Let's see. Okay. So I actually just enabled my firewall logging on this one, so I haven't actually captured any attempts here to do anything. But anyway, so that's one example of some measures that you can take to kind of ensure that you can actually visualize what your infrastructure is doing. So many people kind of hook this stuff up and they go, okay, great, I got it all plugged in, it's working. Well, how do you know? And that's one of the important things about this FCC notice proposed rulemaking. Not only do they want you to report, when things happen, but they also want you to report back to when you should have known that something had happened. I found that language kind of interesting. So, it was something like 72 hours. They want you to,
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just like, okay, so how am I supposed to discern that? Well, if you've just got if you've got nothing on your network that's watching this stuff and that's monitoring this stuff, you have no clue. You don't know when that attacker got in there.
No, the FCC is asking us definitely to upgrade 2 or 3 steps.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But I mean, my point is the stuff does not have to be super expensive or super difficult.
You mentioned $400 for that.
For this particular firewall, yeah. And this is on their high end of stuff. It's called the UniFi Dream Machine Pro. It's a single rack unit box. And yeah, right now they're going for about $400. And then that you can add their access points to that for your Wi-Fi to kind of cover all of that stuff. And I mean, their access points. Their access points are not horribly expensive either. They're all, each one is, somewhere between $100, $200. There are even some that are under $100, depending on what types you want to install.
Wayne Pesina had mentioned this as a $300.
Yes.
Purchase.
Yep. Yep. And these appliances, these firewall appliances are actually a really great, option. I mean, if you're a little more savvy, you can even make a firewall yourself with perfect timing, Barry. It's like you knew I was going to go there.
Hey, I'm in radio, my friend. Timing is the key.
So you could even make your own firewall with a Raspberry Pi, and they work fairly well. I even have on my network, my personal network at home, I'm using this UniFi hardware, but I also use something called Pi-hole, which is loaded on that Raspberry Pi. Now, that's not a firewall per se. What it is it's kind of acts like a DNS server. It acts like a name server. But it blocks any malicious traffic, any ads, or any other kind of known malicious actors that could, that are out there, as far as from clients trying to access them within your network. So it just acts like a DNS server and says, "Oh, that guy's on my blacklist. I'm not going to let that request resolve." And here's another example of a great little firewall. I mean, this is all, inexpensive stuff. And this one even does allow for VPNs to be established as well. So you could set up a VPN client, and this would be great for something to have at your transmitter site, for instance. You set up that VPN link between your client and your transmitter site, and you're covered. I mean, that's you can't really hit it from the outside unless you go through that VPN tunnel. And I mean, let's face it, nothing is impossible to hack, but the more difficult you can make it, the better. I mean, these guys tend to try to go for low-hanging fruit first. And, if you, as I said before, and as I know Jeff has said, if it can be seen, it can be hacked. The site Shodan is a great example of that. Yeah, I mean, you go on there, and if you do searches for various pieces of equipment, the amount of broadcast infrastructure that pops up on Shodan is just disturbing. everything from codecs to transmitters to audio processors to RDS. I mean, it's all out there on
Even some EAS boxes.
Yeah. So please put your stuff behind firewalls. I mean, not just NAT, but actually make sure that there's some kind of basic kind of filtering and firewalling capability built in addition to just NAT. And if you're doing port forwarding, please rethink that and, look at maybe moving toward a VPN type of architecture instead.
Great. Well, I'm not gonna stop you, but I want to bring Danny in.
Go right ahead. Absolutely.
See if he's got something that he'd like to add to our discussion at this point. Danny, are you there? You are. You're not making any noise yet.
You may have a hardware malfunction there.
Yes. Yes, he he may have a firewall in his microphone. Mark from KLUX mentions using Kerio. Mark, you want to say something about that?
That's one I'm not familiar with. But yeah, I'd be curious to know more. Mark, how's that working out for you?
So far, so good. Of course, you don't know till you've had a failure, but it's a one rack unit, hardware type device, and like you're saying, with most firewalls, has rules you can exclude or include, whitelist only, all that stuff. It also has a pretty well rated VPN and clients for Mac, Windows, yada yada yada. It used to work with my iPhone, but they did an update and broke that. So right now I can't get in with my iOS devices, but I can get in with Mac and Windows, and everything is behind that. I don't have anything directly exposed, and we're just a small, non-com, but it's pretty important to get that right. And the other thing is we have about 6, I think last count, different VLANs, and a couple of them are like the transmitter stuff only. There's a ubiquitous link to the tower.
Yep.
And that's on its own VLAN, and even if a lot of stuff goes down, or you can't get to it unless you're inside somehow,
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, the UniFi system I was showing there earlier, I have similar setup. I've got an audio VLAN. There's a Dante network running there. There's an NDI network running there for audio and video stuff. But it's all firewalled. It's all on their,
the other
all on
thing
their own
we do
VLANs.
is the actual audio to the site is carried as UDP over a S900 STL. So the network stuff has nothing to do with getting my audio there.
Perfect.
So hopefully I can turn off the internet and stay on the air if I had to. It'd be inconvenient, but it's possible. That was kind of the simple, but we did something approach, and the EAS is all behind that. So
that's great.
Hopefully that's protected. Of course, change all the default passwords.
Yeah.
Every time.
Oh no, you can't possibly mean
Yeah,
that.
how can I forget to mention that? Oh yeah, finding the various boxes out there with the default passwords open.
It's terrible. If you run those scans, like you were saying, it's terrible what you see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a whole site that lists exposed cameras of different kinds.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those people don't know they're putting on a show. It's pretty scary.
Yeah.
Bill Putney
mentions pfSense, and that's another excellent option for firewall. It gets a little bit, it really can get a little bit more advanced. So that, yeah, it's a great option for firewall. Well,
the other thing with the firewall is I pay somebody to monitor a quote security guy, and it's logging stuff. And I get a message or a phone call from him occasionally. Hey, did you know somebody's looking at such and such a site? And
all the better. Like I said, the UniFi system I showed earlier would kind of show you that kind of traffic as well in terms of, which clients are looking at what and, what's generating what traffic. But yeah, it's great to definitely get some visibility into that. So you can make sure that
we put out a note that says your use of the network is monitored. You sign a note that says we can look at what you're doing. Nothing is private.
Yep.
I'll tell people that work there, if you want to check your bank balance and stuff, do it on something that's not on my network. I take
Right.
more precautions, but I can see everything, and I don't want to see your bank stuff. I don't want it at all. Please don't do that. So
Right.
that's-
If you're doing it on your on work resources, you have to assume that it's probably, they're probably able to be monitored. So
Yeah. So, so that's how that works. I mean, and we have a relatively small number of, there's like under 5 employees.
Yeah.
So
that's a great example, Mark, of how it doesn't really take a whole lot to, in terms of
but
cost.
you do
or
have
in
to
terms
check on it, and
Yeah.
somebody has to look at the logs.
Yeah.
And you should look at, even with all that, I still look at the EAS logs because it does log login attempts.
Yep.
You want to know why is somebody trying to log into that?
Yeah. Audit logs are important. That's another great point.
And
Bill,
the
I
FCC
see your
is gonna
hand up
require
there.
that.
Bill,
I think the
funding?
FCC. Go ahead, Barry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask. We put in a bunch of Ubiquity hardware in our new studios, mostly because it was we were going to do a lot of fiber in there, and the prices seemed to be right. And we've had some modest amount of grief running AOIP through Ubiquity switches. And I wonder if, this, I guess it's a little off the topic, but if you're going to go with a UniFi Ubiquity solution for a firewall, it kind of implies you're going to have some UniFi stuff behind it.
That is a good point. And actually, yeah, I'm running Dante on these systems. Like I said, Dante and NDI. I've not tried one of these with other AOIP systems, but they seem to handle the multicast traffic okay. But yeah, you do have to pay attention to, how big your network is going to be, and because they do have limits, and B, how it's actually set up. But if you're going to have a really extensive internal AOIP plant like that, you might start looking at other big iron options like Cisco. I will say that UniFi, I mean, for all the good parts about UniFi, they're not necessarily a media savvy platform in terms of passing a lot of audio and video. I mean, like I said, in this install, it's fairly small, and I do get away with doing Dante and NDI over it fairly well. But yeah, it's a point well taken for sure.
Yeah, I'm really happy with the Ubiquity stuff I have at home, but it's not hasn't been that pleasant at work. We've got it tamed now, but it really took some extraordinary efforts to do it.
Yeah. Again, not to get too far afield here, but there was one feature in particular that is typically enabled by default to allow kind of this discovery of various devices to cross across the various VLANs, MDNS, multicast DNS. When I enabled that, it broke a whole bunch of stuff because there was traffic trying to get to places it shouldn't be getting. So yeah, stuff like that. But yeah, we're getting more into the deeper implementation type stuff now. So
yeah, I've been using PF Sense for almost everything for a couple of decades, and it's public domain stuff. There's also a supported version of it, but the software is kept regularly updated. It has all the traps and filters you could ever want, and logging. Importantly, it has logging, and we've implemented it at KPTZ as actually a 2-layer system. So we have a layer 2 firewall that doesn't have any IP addresses at all on the WAN ports, so that we can filter out stuff. And there's no real way to assail that because there's no address to address your attack to.
Right.
And then we have a layer 3 firewall behind that has all the rules, and it has NAT, and it has WireGuard and IPsec and OpenVPN and all that stuff. And the price is right, maybe not so right the way we've done it. We've used Dell servers in our stuff, but in the past I've used, any 64-bit, kind of 4-core computer, desktop computer. It doesn't take much memory. I think 4 gigs is probably overkill.
Yeah.
So the price is right.
Yeah, I mean the trade-off is, the software is open source and available for free. The trade-off is probably a little bit more in terms of the time in setting it up and maintaining it, I suspect, right, Bill?
Yeah, it is, but it's like anything else. If you have this universe of capability, you use the 20% that you need, right. and the learning curve's not too steep on that.
Right. Yeah, the basic pfSense setup isn't too bad at all, as I recall.
What I'm hoping
a lot of things are defaulted.
What I'm hoping to do is over the next few weeks, maybe we can schedule a few more presentations that are a little more specific to a program or a piece of hardware, a way to get started, particularly at the transmitter site. I think that's where I would like to start, because once we get to a studio with multiple LANs and VLANs, now you get really much more complicated. And so for some of us that have just the transmitter or a very simple station, 5 people, Mark says, we want to get something simple to start with. If there's anyone that has a question that they'd like to bring to the floor, while Shane's here, while Bill's here, please press your space bar or alternate A and bring your question forward, or raise your hand and I'll call on you. Take your pick. But we'd like to answer any questions that come up in answering what the heck is a firewall.
Very early on, there was a discussion about firewall rules, and I think the discussion went that we could go ahead and make a rule that said only something from this address would be allowed. If you've got a roving connection that can come in from various, let's say, sports facilities, can the rule not so much be an address but be the device's MAC address?
Well, we just got this. I asked that question earlier,
Okay.
and was informed the MAC is not being transmitted down the line.
Right. You're talking about layer 2 versus layer 3, and layer 2 is not really routable per se, and it doesn't. You don't transmit layer 2 information across the internet. That's all layer 3, which is the IP layer. Layer 2 and the MAC address, that's the physical layer.
Yeah,
So really,
if there's a thing called a man-in-the-middle attack, which is somebody is in a position to see things go across the wire to you, they can pick up your IP addresses that you're using. They can pick up anything that's in the clear. So if you have connection to your transmitter site, and it can see your IP address, and it can see the password, the username and password you use, all that kind of stuff that's in the clear. It really drives you pretty quickly to VPN. Some of the early Microsoft VPNs did not encrypt the data; they just encrypted the connection mechanism. So they can still see your usernames and passwords and all that kind of stuff. It's half a loaf. And these days, those sorts of things are easy to set up. But
I'd assume that all web interface now would be HTTPS, which would encrypt all that. And then also for roving stuff, what about two-factor authentication and require send a text message to the person? I do that a lot on my servers.
Those are both great points, Harold. And yeah, 2FA, two-factor authentication, is another great tool that you can use on networks to kind of prevent outside attack. So in other words, something that you know and something that you have. For instance, like I know my password, but I also have my device, which has a kind of a key generator, a rotating key generator on it, which so it's, or that device is getting a prompt saying, hey, here's the number that you requested as part of this login, or if this was this you.
Do any of these appliances provide that 2FA, or we only talk about?
That gets a little bit more in depth. There are some out there that may incorporate 2FA, but that gets into a little bit more in depth type of infrastructure.
So for
Yeah, they're
what the
typically
runner's asking is mostly that it seems to be screaming VPN to me.
VPN, I would say, is probably the best approach, especially even if you just want to protect a transmitter site. Say even if you've just got a transmitter site that you want to protect, getting a VPN router there and using a VPN client to attach to that router rather than going straight in. I mean, yes, okay, it's one extra step you have to take to make that to establish that connection before you can get to those IP addresses, but it is infinitely more secure than just doing port translation or putting them on public IP addresses directly.
Do you recommend any of the freeware VPNs, or do you recommend only an appliance?
So
are there any
not
freeware VR?
Right,
I think they're pretty
right.
much all the ones that people recommend are free. IPsec is free if whatever you're using has that implementation. I mean, there's not going to be any IPsec device to device to speak of. OpenVPN is free. WireGuard is free. So VPNs on the software side are pretty free. There's some firewalls that integrate VPN. pfSense has that. Some of the other commercial little firewall boxes have VPN, most frequently IPsec. IPsec is not the most friendly to set up, but once it works, it works.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of the firewalls are going to have that type of feature built in. Now, as far as on the client side, a lot of operating systems have that feature built in as well. So you may not even need to load any kind of third-party client. You may have to just basically set it up on both ends and off you go.
But if you have an appliance, then, or one of those Internet of Things kind of device that you're monitoring, most of those are pretty limited.
Right.
One of the Native American tribes that I help out from time to time, they use a Cisco system. So you have to have Cisco software, and then you go through their VPN, and then you can get into the system and do things. Right. But I'm sure that's not free.
Right. Absolutely not. Cisco, Cisco is still the big dog as far as a lot of that stuff goes, and it carries a price tag accordingly. But there are a bunch of other options out there as well for small and medium-sized type operations. I mean, everything from low to no cost to moderate costs. It really just depends on how elaborate you want to get.
So well, I'm hoping sometime here in November we'll do a VPN-oriented day and maybe demonstrate one or two of them and go through that. Any other questions that you might have in your mind that you'd like to bring to us? Mark Voris, you have some thoughts on hardware VPNs? Oh, you got Barracuda.
Barracuda.
I hate Barracuda. Of all the things that I've over the years have had trouble with old radio and the BDR, Barracuda has this default setting, I guess, that if an email carries a different originating IP address from the IP address it blocks it. So here I am on a CoxNet cable drop, and I go through the server for old radio or the BDR, and now I have a different IP address attached to the email from my CoxNet, and Barracuda gives me hassles every time.
Yeah, some of these rules can be set up pretty aggressive by default. I mean, and I guess rightfully so now, given the very rather hostile place that the internet seems to have become in terms of
I was just looking, traffic. And I guess I consider the Curio kind of like a hardware software thing. It's got software in it, but it's an appliance. Plug in a couple cables and it's setting up, browse to it. But CDW has it for about $1,700 plus a subscription for the firmware. So I don't know I don't pay those bills, so I didn't know what it costs. That's what it costs, and that includes the VPN clients, and you could monitor it yourself, or we pay somebody to do that.
Of course, the next step is, as they say in the Dilbert strip.
But I think the subscription is something like a couple hundred a year. So the ongoing cost is pretty minimal.
So you get information prevention. Mark, I didn't read your whole thing here. You mentioned that some IT folks say that Barracuda is not very secure to begin with.
So one comment that I would have is that depending on your IT department, various IT departments are going to have their own kind of standards and their own thoughts on this. If you work with some kind of central IT department, and it's best to just work with them on whatever they propose as a solution, rather than trying to kind of fight them and set up a shadow IT department and do your own thing. I find that often creates more problems than it solves. I've been fortunate in that every place I've been in my career so far, I've had a really great relationship with the IT department. Everything from university campuses to large broadcasters, and they really do, at the core, they really do want to understand your needs and your applications and try to provide solutions for them. You'll always run into the information prevention department in some cases, but I find that you catch more with honey than you do with vinegar, so to speak, and it's, be nice to your IT guys. They have it hard. They can't win either way. Honestly, they're fighting a losing battle when it comes to a lot of this stuff, or, it's truly so. They're doing their best.
You just need to overcome the silo problem. And
exactly. Yeah, I mean, befriend them.
Uh-huh.
I think some of the worst are IT departments at colleges and universities. They've got things locked down, and for good reason. You've got a whole campus full of creative minds with time on their hands. Is a really dangerous environment.
Yep.
So I talk to people on PubTech that have problems, and I can't do that because my IT department won't let me. A lot of the times, like you say, if you befriend your IT department and say, well, here's my problem, how would you solve this?
Exactly.
Then you enroll them in the process, and the idea that you jointly come up with that solves your problems and their problems, you don't get much pushback.
And
sometimes that does work. There's another station that I'm aware of. They have a digital console where the metering stopped working. Now, for the manufacturer to take a look and solve the problem, they need to connect by any desk. And any desk, unfortunately, you can't download at this particular station. They have blocked almost everything with port 80. And even then, they blocked a lot of sites. So they can't get the software. They can't connect to the console. They can't figure out what their problem is. And they call me up and say, tell us what to do. Well,
full employment economy.
Get with your IT people and get them to do the job here. Jeff, you had a comment here about confidence monitoring. Mr. Adams?
When we installed the WatchGuard, it took away the confidence monitor that we had. It's a Barracks box in streamer. It was this is one of those that came with the purchase of the station about 6 years ago, and so it was working fine. But until we went with the with that firewall, so and I've been trying to figure out some way in which to get it back.
If your firewall has logging, generally it will tell you which ports it's stopping traffic from going through. That's one way. I mean, a lot of things use a lot of different ports, and usually if you call Barracks or call Comrex and say, what ports are you using to do this? They'll give you a list, and you have to make sure that those ports are open for access to that device.
And there are also
Good.
there are also tools like Wireshark, for instance,
Sure.
that can be helpful in troubleshooting those types of problems. I mean, that gets to be a very overwhelming tool, but once you start to kind of master it, it really, I mean, it's almost as valuable as your SpecAn or your oscilloscope. Once you know, in an IP connected world, it really is. So
Barrick's got a very large user base because they were cheap, and secondly, they were one of the first out there to say, yeah, well, you can replace your STL, you can do this, you can do that. But as was mentioned earlier on Shodan, they're very often exposed. The .0 wrap turned up on several stations that, yep, had Barrick's boxes. So yeah, you got to be careful.
yeah, indeed. And, you know, I will mention that not all broadcast manufacturers are really savvy when it comes to IT security either. So all the more reason to try to make sure that your stuff is, you know, behind a secure environment to begin with.
Absolutely.
And I don't know whether it's been brought up, but whatever you get, you know, the threat environment changes daily, and manufacturers and software vendors try and keep up, and it's a race, right? I mean, they see a threat pop up and get posted somewhere, and so it's a race to see if the script kiddies and the black hatters get to your site first before you get the patch put up. If you're not watching the warnings that are coming across the console on your firewall, or you don't get the email from the manufacturer that says, hey, you know, put in this update, then your firewall is compromised in pretty short order. And you know, I can't. And the biggest problem with the home NAT translation firewalls is not that they weren't okay when they came from the factory, but you know, 2 weeks later they need a software update, and there's no way anybody knows how to find out about it. You bought it from Office Depot, you didn't send in your warranty card, you never log into it because it just works.
Yep, it's not a problem until it is.
Yeah.
And well, and now's a good time. This is actually a great time to bring up something called zero-day vulnerabilities as well. And these are things that are basically discovered by hackers, but have not been released to the public in any way, shape, or form yet. And you know, they will literally take advantage of them as soon as they find them. And those are kind of difficult to fight. I mean, but you know, keeping on top of these, you know, these updates is one way to do that, or using a manufacturer and their service to make sure that those are kept up to date as well.
Yeah, there's two trains of thought on firewall software. One is that if you have something proprietary like Barracuda or one of the IBM province or something, those sorts of things, there's all kinds of really secret sauce in there, and they may have a room full of engineers to create defenses against the attackers. The other way to go is something like pfSense or OpenVP or Open. What is it? There's an open firewall that's like a takeoff of on pfSense, but several. Yeah, and so you know, those, you have a whole community full of people. Yeah, everybody knows the software and what's in it because everybody has the source code, but everybody's working on keeping the bad guys out. So you know, you've got a world full of, in the case of pfSense, I don't know, tens of thousands of people working on supporting it.
Yeah. The greatest part about open source software is all the community support. The worst part about open source software is all the community support.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's this adage that, you know, obscurity is not security. So just because, you know, nobody knows what's in Barracuda's secret sauce doesn't mean that Barracuda's secret sauce is doing what it needs to do.
Yeah, I deal with a lot of Palo Alto these days, and it's the same way.
Yep.
Danny, I see you're back. Have you got a microphone working? Poor
Who
guy.
needs to close caption Danny?
He just had to reboot himself, and I'll tell you, there every so often one of these Zoom updates just completely collapses everything.
Feature.
Yeah.
Windows audio stinks, but we're all put up with it.
True enough.
Another thing my firewall does is interesting, just throwing this out there, is it has a capability of main and backup internet service. And so I have AT&T fiber on one port and a Spectrum cable modem on the other.
Yeah, that's a great feature to have
If-
incorporated into a firewall.
If one
And,
goes, I can walk over and I do it occasionally to make sure it works. I unplug one to see what happens.
what's the time that you see in terms of kind of reconverging the routing when you do that, Mark?
About 3 seconds.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, on a hard fault that happens pretty quickly. On more the
Soft fault,
statistical.
no. Yeah, we had a problem one morning when I wasn't there, and I finally told the manager, go pull the red plug to make it a hard fault. And then
Yeah.
it switched and life was okay.
Yeah,
you
and
know.
kind of some of the statistical things like dropping packets somewhere midstream. It looks like you've got a great connection to the next router upstream, but the three routers down at past some peering point is
It was an
throwing everything
AT&T
away.
problem. And once we totally disconnected it, that forced it to go to the other one. That was okay. And then we worked through the problem.
But those
yeah.
other kinds of things, those other non-hard fault kind things, kind of tend to converge very
It's not
slowly.
perfect, but at least we weren't down for very long. 10 minutes to go. It took 10 minutes. I told the guy, pull the red plug, and we were back in business. So didn't have to panic. Just take care of it. And that's a pretty cheap insurance too. I think we already had cable in the building, so we could watch the Weather Channel and stuff. So the additional cost was very minimal.
Yeah, I have that at a couple of sites as well, and it really is a great feature to have, and to be able to to have one of those circuits go down and still maintain connectivity, basically without having to do a whole lot you don't have to do anything. It just maintains. I mean, in my case, it's got a VPN tunnel, and that internal network stays the same. It just says, oh, this external connection has failed. Okay, I'm gonna go to this one instead.
Yeah, there's even some cellular data card so that you can plug into some of these things and give you a albeit slow backup network connection if you just need to do some metering or that kind of thing, changeovers. You can get that through there. You're not going to get much video through it.
We looked into that, as far as using it as a backup, especially after what happened with Ian, and the ROI just isn't there for wireless, unfortunately, because the amount of data that it would go through would just not be cost effective, and it's unfortunate too. I wish we could get some kind of like a $30 a month plan or some stupid thing like that, but unfortunately it doesn't exist in this area.
Can you get T-Mobile in your area?
We have T-Mobile, but we've looked into that, and in fact, I used to have the Sprint card. In fact, I had Freedom Pump. That's fine if you're going to go ahead and just do this stuff, just on occasion. But if you're going to use it for streaming, it's going to then it puts it into a different tier, and so it was unfortunate too, because it would have kept us on the air. Both of our circuits went down. One was a CenturyLink DSL, the other was an over-the-air Rapid Systems. The Rapid Systems was 50 meg download, but interestingly enough, the CenturyLink DSL is the one that came back first, and that put us back on the air. But we're too far away for STL for that.
Yeah.
But having, it's interesting you mentioned the 2 circuits though, because we were on the air the entire time at the studios. I came in the next morning and I told and I was talking with the owner. He said, Comcast really worked out for us. I said, no, it didn't. I said, that was the Frontier fiber. I said, Comcast has been down. I said, you were working on one, and it's a good thing we had both circuits, because Frontier is the one you were using.
Yeah, you can get cheap backup if you run, if your studio and transmitter are in the back of somebody's house and they have a residential address, then you can get all these inexpensive services. As soon as you say, well, we're in the Century Building downtown, they say, oh, okay, we have a deal for you.
It's
it's
funny,
not an inexpensive one.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that too, because one of the other owners has Starlink, and he has it at his home. But I looked into that also. Now the equipment for residential is only $500, and it's it's $100 a month. Okay, fine, we can deal with that. But as soon as we went for the commercial end of it, that's when the price jacked up 5 times. $2,500 for the equipment and $500 a month, and it just put it right out of it. However, we are right next to a farm, so the idea there is, I don't think we know the neighbors, but it would be interesting though. Maybe we could just make them a little bit of a deal.
Yeah, if you got a neighbor that lives in a house, you can pay for their 1 gig symmetric internet connection and do a ubiquity link across the antenna field. Probably not exactly legit per the contract, but it's used for residential most of the time.
That's it.
I have a question.
It exposed a lot of holes.
Yeah, we have Ziply fiber up in this area, and I was really impressed that I could get a commercial service from Ziply for a reasonable price, and I think their philosophy is that that we want to give residential customers good service. So, if we're already doing that, it doesn't cost us that much more to give good service to a commercial customer. So, I got a 500 gig or 500 megabit symmetric for, I think, $100 with 6 IP addresses that are fixed. It was a deal. I saw somebody else pop up, had a question.
I have a weird question, kind of pivoting on something that Barry had said about a Barracuda. The question is to Shane. Does a Barracuda as a hardware box, and this is a generic question about hardware boxes, can they go through a transmitted file and find problems in a transmitted file like a music file?
So I don't know of any that actually do that sort of inspection, but what they will do in a lot of cases is that they'll look at like zip files and stuff, and they will look for particular problem files within those archives. But it's mostly based on files that are known to be problematic. Like for instance, I recently ran into an issue where I could no longer download the Nautel application to access the AUI because of a new firewall that said, no, that contains Adobe Air. You can't download that. So, yeah. But no, as far as like finding, issues in a file, like a music file or a corrupt file or something, that gets to be a little bit more of a challenge. That's kind of a more specialized application.
Firewalls are a fence you put up around your site. and they're intended to keep, you know, people they recognize as bad people out. The problem is if your nighttime guy brings in his thumb drive with all his stuff that he downloaded at home into your site, you know, that's a vector for infection, and there's nothing you can do about that at the firewall. You need to have your computers need to be protected individually too, with virus software and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, my story is 5 or 8 years old. I was talking to an IT person at a medical facility that had multiple sites, and his description to me about having to do legal filing of medical forms or files, and that they all had to go through the quote-unquote Barracuda system. And I just happened to mention that I thought one of my clients had a corrupted music file, multiple files. And he said, let me see what I can do. And he said it took like 10 custom filters from Barracuda, but he was able to find something and filter some of the music files. I don't know how realistic that is as a story, but
I mean, if you have specific characteristics in files that you're looking for, absolutely, they can be set up to, you know, to look for that. But yeah, I mean, off the shelf, those tend to be more specialized applications. But yeah, it sounds like, I mean, in theory, you could do that with something. I guess you could do something like that with a Barracuda if you knew the characteristics and you could write up the custom rules and filters for it. So the problem is those characteristics aren't always going to be consistent. I mean, so what impairs one file may be a different impairment in a different file, for instance. So
yeah,
and firewalls are fending off so much stuff all of the time. You know, if I look at the firewall logs are not very helpful until I find one that it actually passed. But firewalls are fending off junk all the time, and they're very busy. If you try doing something like this on a Raspberry Pi, and then try and say, okay, well, in addition to just kind of like saying, you know, keeping the bad guys out, I'm also going to look inside of every packet and assemble them into a file and try and find a fingerprint for something. Boy, that's asking a lot from a firewall.
Yeah, that's definitely some big horsepower type stuff. But I mean, the technology is there. I mean, for actual content inspection, I mean, the technology is there. But like I said, usually that tends to be, I mean, at least in terms of media, that tends to be offloaded to a separate type of specialized application.
Yeah, it took him a day and a half to run all the files from this music library. And what was happening is the minute the music library was attached to the automation system, it would run 1 or 2 songs and then lock itself back out again. Right. And we were told, scrap the music library, go buy one, and it was a custom library. And I mentioned it to him. He said, bring me the hard drive with a copy of it. He ran it. He said, use this copy on this hard drive, get rid of everything else. And in one of those stories of, I don't know how it works, but it did solve whatever issue we had.
Right. Yeah, and I did have a similar issue once, and actually it was a utility from it was a file ingest utility from the automation manufacturer that was able to clean it up for me. It was able to recognize a file that was malformed and basically not import that into the library. So,
I think I heard Danny pop back up.
Yeah, I should just end this by saying the Barracuda was offline and had gone off. I mean, they were closing a facility. He had a spare Barracuda in the rack. He was about ready to strip the rack out. He just said, I've got a couple of days. Let me play with this. So
that's actually a pretty clever use. I wouldn't have thought to use that on media files, but it's a pretty clever use of it.
We had a problem with a library, just real briefly. Had a guy putting new stuff in the library, and when we started playing it, it would lock up the automation. That he had entered some comments in one of the metadata fields, and the automation didn't like that. As soon as we went back and erased out his comments, then it worked. But if he had done that to every song, it would have been a lot harder to figure out.
If you click on a link and it takes a day and a half to get a response, you're probably you know.
So fortunately, he had only put in about 10 songs when we figured out what was happening. But you wouldn't have expected that because you're supposed to be able to put comments into metadata. That's what it's for.
Yep.
Yeah, Mark is asking about whitelisting, and it's a thing, I suppose. But if one of the concerns you have is like a man in the middle, which is pretty common on like campus environments, then your whitelist is a list of IP addresses you intrinsically trust, and all you have to do to spoof an IP address is change it in your Windows setup, and now you're that guy. It may confuse things for a while, but the whitelist is going to pass it. So,
Yeah.
Danny, you want to give a shot here?
Well, let's see. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Hey, there you are.
That's a miracle. I brought up Zoom yesterday, or tried to, and it didn't work, so I had to reinstall it again. But I didn't test the microphone, so that's what you get when you don't test everything. I was offline for a little while after I rebooted there. Tim and Shane did an excellent job, in my opinion, on the firewalls. Pretty well discussing everything. And of course, I heard what Barry and the rest of them said about the FCC, and et cetera. I have a bunch of remote sites. A lot of the guys are talking about the Ubiquity stuff. I got burnt out on Ubiquity back years ago and decided to not use it anymore. I use Cambium stuff and have a large amount of Cambium stuff. Both firewalls, routers and firewalls, as well as radios, several being used as STLs, et cetera, et cetera. And I find it's a lot better equipment. You have cloud monitoring on all that stuff, et cetera, et cetera. One of the, let me see if I can go over here and share a screen here if I can.
Muted himself again.
Yep. You didn't share yet, Danny, but you muted yourself.
Okay, trying to see why it didn't show up here. Got it
Okay.
up on this. Iterate, we use the Cambium.
Bottom of the screen, the little green thing that says share. Then grab the screen you want and click share in the lower right corner.
Now the problem is it's not there on the screen, on the share screen, the desktop.
You have too many windows. There's a little thing that says more windows or show more.
Well, not that I see. Let me turn the.
Up, here you come.
All right, can you see that?
Yep.
What do you see that? Okay. We use
Cambium Networks. You muted yourself.
well,
Now you got your email up. There you go. Cambium.
can you
Yes.
can you hear me now?
Yep.
You can hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. These are the R200 series routers. In my opinion, they're very good. We probably, well, in addition to the radio stations that we have several private networks for federal government stuff. We're hauling video and audio on the Cambium radios, if you will. There's some guys here in the U.S. that I've told to use it, and they're using for STL links, which work pretty well. The radio equipment, but this is this is one of the Cambium routers at a remote studio transmitter site, and we were talking about poking holes in it. If we go over here and look at the network, you can see on this particular router how many holes that I have poked in this particular router. This is actually feeding 2 stations and a translator also. So we have STL audio headed that way. We have TSL audio coming back on barracks. Our STL audio, by the way, that we feed to these remote sites, we do it on Diva. I'm not a big fan of barracks, 100s or 500s or 1000s. I've seen way too many problems with it. I probably got about 20 or 30 Diva DB90 encoders and decoders installed, and they just sit there and work. But these are the holes that we have poked in it, headed that direction to get into various things, as well as, of course, STL and TSL. We do not have any, I don't know whether anybody mentioned DMZ. If they did, I did not hear it. There is a setting in most routers, including the Cambium, that you can turn on a particular IP address, and that will open all of the ports to a particular IP address at the remote location. I think Tim, or either Tim or Shane, mentioned there's 65,525 or 535 ports each per IP address. So there's lots of ports that can be opened. You can move up there. I'm trying to think here. I don't have QoS set up on this. We're running, this is a 50 meg fiber circuit coming into this router. And we're actually sending from the studio on 100 meg fiber, if you will. A couple of other things I was going to show you here. This is some of the monitoring, the cloud monitoring that we have with the Cambium stuff. This is free. We have an ISP that we operate. This happens to be a remote AP. These are particular customers on it. This guy here moved, and this guy here didn't pay his bill, so we shut him remotely, shut him off. And I have stuff barely all over Texas and southern part of the U.S. that we monitor with this. Coming in here at the studio, we have all V4 IPs. I am not running any VP stuff. I'm trying to leave that for somebody else to mess with. But we actually come in here, and the 100 meg coming in here is feeding one of these PEP-Link routers. We have dual firewalls. This is the first firewall. Then that feeds over to another machine, which is running Smoothwall, which is like pfSense. I've run pfSense before, but I like the Smoothwall better. This probably has several hundred IP addresses on the other side of the Smoothwall. The PEP-Link here that you see, I think somebody mentioned that they had something that had dual ports on it as far as on the WAN. We have 100 meg fiber tied to WAN 1. We have backup DSL tied to WAN 2. So it will automatically switch back and forth if we have a problem. We don't have any problem with the fiber. The fiber stays up. It's Frontier, et cetera, et cetera. I heard somebody else mention Starlink. I have one remote transmitter site that, let me turn this off here if I can, figure out how to do it. Let's see here, pause and share. I guess that it. Is that good? Okay. I have one remote transmitter site located about 100 miles away. I have DSL. And I ordered Starlink when it first came out because we were having so many problems with the DSL. It was up and down, et cetera. And it's also fed by Frontier. But I got them to, I figured out that they had another fiber that they were putting in with other equipment that was the government paid for, part of this government giveaway stuff. And I got them to move it over to it and really have not had any trouble with it. But prior to getting to move over to it, I ordered from Starlink. It took about 1.5 years to get the home system, if you will, which is now $600, and I think it's $110 or $120 a month. They've raised the price on the monthly as well as the outright purchase. Finally got it in, got it set up. I had it set up at the house. We were running 2 TVs constantly on it. My better half works from home Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, answers the phone for Nationwide Insurance from 7 in the morning to 1:30 at night, or 1:30 in the afternoon, if you will, and never had any problems with it. Very easy to set up. I took it, ended up having to take it over to the transmitter site. I ran it that way about 3 months from the house. Finally got an email from Starlink that says, we see that you have it located in a place where it was not registered at. And if you don't put it back where it was registered at, you've got to go in and set it up for roaming and pay us an extra $20 a month for roaming, or we're going to shut it off, one of the two. So I took it over the transmitter site. I've installed it over there. I am not running any audio through it. I will tell you this, the little Starlink adapter that gets you from the Cat 5, Cat 6 down to Ethernet does not work reliably. I messed with it for about 3 hours. I'd seen some indications from other people on some links that they were having trouble, and I actually measured it, and you can only get about 20 meg out of that Starlink adapter, even though it's set up for a 1000 base T. I don't know what the problem is with it. But I'm going to get back on that project when I get time, and then move the STL stuff over it as well as the TSL stuff. So anyway, we've also up in for federal government sites, I've got a bunch of Cambium stuff running microwave wise. We're running 40 or 50 HD video cameras on a couple of different networks at a particular location. We have several locations. So these are secure sites running all the telco stuff and high dollar stuff. So it has to sit there and play. So that's kind of what we're doing down here.
Well, very interesting. Thank you, Danny. Nice look at that that system.
Danny, I'm curious on all that router that you have all those open ports on. They're NAT translated into your interior.
Yes.
So those don't have any rules to keep just anybody from connecting to those ports, right?
No, those are all on static. Everything I have is on static IP. By the way, this coming in here, I have 64 statics here, and I had to argue with Frontier to give me 64. Originally had there's a company called Fiberlight, and it was costing about 3 times more than it should be, and they were up and down all the time, and the fiber ran all over the world before it got to me. And I finally talked Frontier into bringing me fiber, and I had 64 with Fiberlight, and I got 64 with Frontier. I do not have anything whitelisted. I have some stuff blacklisted in the firewalls. You'll see that if you look at the logs, like the guys were mentioning, you'll see China, you'll see Russia, some of the foreign countries over there. So I just block the block of IPs. So, but have not had any problem getting into it. Of course, most of the stuff that you have, at any rate, a lot of the stuff, it takes a special program to get into it. So even though you're NAT forwarding to a different port, you still got to have the program that the manufacturer has to get into it, to talk to it, and then you got the username and password. So I've not had anybody.
Yeah, I just worry about people doing things like putting holes in their firewall so they can get to their AUI. And once you've gotten to the AUI, you can change frequency, you can change power, you can change audio source, you can select it to get audio from a streaming service. It is just opens the whole Pandora's box. You can become an overnight hard rock station from your classical station running twice the licensed power on 2 channels up, whatever your antenna system will allow, pretty much.
Yeah, I understand.
So what's the solution on that? How about log me in? You mentioned AnyDesk before. But what about LogMeIn?
Those generally go through, essentially what I think they're doing is they're actually, you've got a client that is whoever trying to log into whatever you've got LogMeIn set up on, and there's a server out there, and both of you are meeting at their server to do some whatever thing. They probably don't want you up there 100% of the time. And from a reliability standpoint, you know, they can do whatever they want to do to decide, hey, these guys have been on here for a long time, take them off. If it happens to be your STL or your control link or, you know, something else, you may lose your control of your transmitter, or you may lose the audio feed to your transmitter. Not a very good solution. VPN is I think the right solution for even that. WireGuard is a new one and has a very good delay spec, so you don't have, so people can still use headphones.
Well, the Comrex system requires the receiver to contact the sender, and that kind of locks it up so that nobody else can get in.
We have used LogMeIn, and I'm trying to remember what the other one was.
Any
kept going
desk,
up.
Go to my
any desk
Sorry?
and Team Viewer.
Yeah,
are
any
the
desk
big
and
ones. But any desk now, the free version has a time limitation.
Yeah, what you do if you use the free version, they'll eventually lock it down. You can't get through it. I use Splashtop. Splashtop is, we have a license for 50 remote clients, and I'm using probably 40, 45 of them. And it works very well. You can actually get into it just like you're sitting there at the front desk. And it does work with some server somewhere that everybody has to log into. And you bring up the menu or the list here and click on the one you want, it connects you. I think they have changed it so it actually has a pure connection. Once you connect, it actually connects you somehow directly. It does not go through their server. But we've had very good luck with that. The cost for 50 clients is a little less than $5 a year. And you won't get that with LogMeIn or anybody else. They're like $1,500 a year. So.
Yeah, LogMeIn goes with about 25 different clients. I'm sorry. Yeah, LogMeIn. I've had go to mypc.com also, and that's worked fairly well.
but those are kind of, I think, misuses of that technology. Probably the VPN, site-to-site VPN or device-to-device VPN is probably the right tool for that job.
Well, I think next
We
week
had the LogMeIn before we had the VPN. So yeah.
next week we're going to have Jeff Welton with us, and probably a good time to talk VPN to a transmitter.
Yeah, I never give Jeff a break. Back, I don't know, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago. Somebody asked in an open forum, asked somebody at Nautel for the root password for the AUI, and they published it. They said, yeah, this is the root password for the AUI. So then, and since it was the same root password, it was a password that their tech support guys used to get into the AUI software. So now everybody had the root password for everybody's Nautel transmitter all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And if you had one of those firewall pinholes, you just gave the keys to the kingdom to anybody that happened to be reading that mailing list.
Oh yeah.
But they changed that.
Yes. They paid attention.
Nautel is very good about that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a good conversation we've had today. Anyone else have a question that they wanted to pop out before? I don't know.
To
if
me, a
Bill-
firewall, yeah, to me, a firewall is like the two trees in my yard. I was glad that I had them during the storm, but they're a pain in the neck any other time.
Yeah, it is a, it's an issue. It's something that somebody needs to watch because, you know, the picture behind me is a picture in the mid 1980s of the internet. The whole thing,
Mhm.
it's actually ARPANET. That's the whole network. And things were pretty genteel. Now you've got state-sponsored terrorists and everything else out there. Probably not many of them attacking radio and television stations, but then you've got the kids that read something on their favorite website and go try it. If and if whatever your station is broadcasting is something that annoys someone who knows about that hack, there's nothing to keep them from taking out their frustration on your station using that tool they have. So yeah, it's a pain in the neck to have a firewall. It tells you more than you want to know about what's going on, but then wouldn't you like to know it rather than like be called in the middle of the night and have to go out in the rain and snow to the transmitter and fix it?
That's the one.
It's not a nice place anymore.